Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's video explores an alternate version of events and characters in a reimagined storyline. This presentation is structured and adapted into an audiobook style format with narration and visuals to enhance the experience. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story.
Row back. The Barrowlands were a land of grassy plain dotted with barrows, or hilled graves, of the first men who'd had their kingdom first centered here. The great barrow, upon which Barrowton surrounded in the hall of House Dustin sat, was said to be the grave of the first king of the first men, or perhaps a king of the giants. It depended upon whom you asked, though it left one thing for certain: Barrow Hall, the seat of House Dustin, should be highly defensible. And yet it had somehow fallen to the Ironborn. Why, Robb could not comprehend. Had they swarmed here and sent minor forces to all other points, and why were they holding on to and defending the fortified hall? Ironborn reaved and then left after taking what they wanted. It neither mattered why these things were so, only that they were, and so Robb found it fell to him to deal with the Ironborn who remained. When he and Brandon Tallhart had set forth from Winterfell with troops from houses Tallhart, Sarwyn, and Winterfell, he had heard the whispers on the mouths of his father's elder bannermen, the children's campaign. At the time he had scoffed, but soon he realized that in a way, that was the potential for his future, should he fail. He would go down as a tragic character akin to brave Dany Flint in the Tales of the North for some future old Nan figure to tell his great-grandnieces and nephews, and Robb did not care to be remembered as such. He would be a warrior, and even if the gods had changed his fate to keep him from being a king, he would still strive to be worthy of such a title. This he had determined would be the trial of fire, with which he would finally prove his mettle to all the type of lord and man he would be. And it seemed as much true for Brandon, though he had not time to assess what drove the boy, just a year, his junior soon to 14, to his newly minted 15. He knew that something spurred him on for something greater than he'd been given in life. That was the only reason why, when they had arrived at the wooden-walled fortifications Barrow Hall, Robb could justify just how rashly the boy threw himself into battle, leading as though he himself had nothing to lose and everything to gain. Seeing him in the battle from afar made him feel a competitive spirit he'd not felt since Jon had left Winterfell, and so Robb felt likewise to do as he had always done with Jon, to match and outdo him. Taking the town had proven easy enough. It was storming the fortified hall that had proven challenging, but soon one of the wooden turtles was wheeled wooden fortress, and its gates were smashed in. During the ensuing fight through the gates, Robb dodged burning oil and took an arrow to his arm, but he still continued to lead, though nearly his entire body wished to crumple up and fall away. Northmen follow strength. I must be strong. They poured into the wooden castle itself to find Barrow Hall a destroyed mess of itself. Despite the looks and arrows from outside, only a small handful of Ironborn held it seemed, whom were met and deftly killed. Robb taking out a few himself. Something was wrong. This was easy, far too easily retaken. Still, he and Brandon personally searched the castle with a small portion of their force for any sign of Lady Dustin, his father's only sworn bannerwoman. As they came upon room after room, it looked like the Ironborn had taken the castle during the night, for they found many rotten corpses home to maggots laying peacefully in their beds. The room that had been Lady Dustin's apparently had the worst of the mess. The body looked to have been raped from the bruisings her disfigured naked body showed, and savagely tortured before being killed. Out of some concern for common decency in death, Robb draped a fur over her maggot-infested body, while Brandon offered a prayer to the gods to give her rest. Was this the fate that all the rest of his father's bannermen would have faced had they not warned them to reinforce their holdfasts and be on the lookout? Had Lady Dustin thought herself far too inland to heavily fortify, despite being on the Barrow River? Had she been slacking in her duty to her people? And had this been the gods' punishment to her for failing to heed their warnings? What if this had been Mother at Winterfell? Robb shuddered with the thought. Winterfell would be secure, from this day forward of that he would be sure. A tightly locked fortress impenetrable to outsiders. He would rebuild the broken tower, repair the older parts of the castle that were slowly turning to ruin, and make Winterfell a mighty fortress to behold instead of just an ancient one. Still, something put him off about the entire affair. This battle had been won far too quickly, and without much loss of life. It felt like and then he smelled it. Smoke. While they had been searching the wooden castle, it had been set aflame. Immediately, both Brandon and Robb, along with their small number of men, rushed out of the room. The castle, being made of extremely dry wood, went up like a tinderbox. And soon Robb found himself coughing, and eyes watering as he stumbled his way through the smoke-filled corridors that soon turned to glow with orange. The further down they crept as they bent low to keep from inhaling as much smoke. Along the way, Brandon and Robb lost their men, having become confused and lost their way through the passageways that seemed to lead to nothing but blocked exits. Most definitely, this was a trap. When a part of a burning wall came collapsing towards him, Brandon shoved him out of the way, entrapping himself beneath. Robb, knowing it was foolhardy, grabbed Brandon's one arm and pulled him out from under the beams. The right side of his upper body, from his chest to his head, were aflame, and Robb did as best as he could to smother the flames, not completely succeeding, as the writhing and shouting Brandon terrified his sight and horrified his ears. It surprisingly was from the fallen wall that they found their escape, as it was on the second level, and easy to jump from. Ro took the burned Brandon upon his shoulders and trusted in himself as he leaped for the ground. He distinctly felt his one ankle twist when he made contact, but he'd take that over death any day. Once to the dry dirt of the courtyard, he was surrounded by the men which they had been separated from in the smoke, and they helped both him and Brandon out of the fire trap of the castle and through the burning gates. Barrowton was simultaneously being evacuated, and the other lining up water lines from the nearest wells in an attempt to douse houses nearby. The Barrow Hill with water to prevent them from easily catching flame too. Everyone took Barrow Hall to be too far gone to be salvageable. It was a flaming arrow, my lord, that came from somewhere in the town, explained one of his men as they made their way to his father's battlefield tent that he had taken for his own. Did you catch the bastard that shot it? Asked Robb hazily, as a maester was brought to attend his wounds. No, my lord. Gam the Ironborn to their storm god, Osha. They were being followed south. 2 crows of death followed behind them, plaguing their every step. The past few days had seen their party slowly, one by one, dwindle and die when a member decided to wander off on their own alone, such as to relieve oneself or to hunt for some kind of food on these abandoned moorlands. And of course, after each death, they had to stop and burn the body, which slowed down their pace further, as they had to scavenge the better of the abandoned huts for wood to burn, and the pyres left a clear trail of dead bodies for any to follow. It was now down to herself, the Cranagh girl, the crow, and her little brother Rickwile. Mayhaps these crows were signs from the gods themselves that they had done wrong to take the girl, but what was done could not be undone. If she were let loose, she would crow to others of their presence, and their stratagem would be at an end. They might as well climb back over the wall if they let her go. Mayhaps that's what the gods wanted, but why then abandon their people to the others for slaughter? Had they done something for which the others were their divine retribution? Osha knew not, but she prayed for wisdom nonetheless on how to continue. But the gods answered her not on these empty moorlands. She needed to find a weirwood, and to do that, they needed to find the great Wolf's Wood. She'd heard the crow mention. This night, on their journey to find the Wolf's Wood, they had reached an abandoned stone hut close to the wide path that led south, and they took shelter of the hut to get out of the fierce Moorish wind that rattled without obstruction across the empty lands. Rickwile still urged that they turn back north with the girl as hostage whom the crow had recognized in the light as the king of the Crenagman's daughter, by the black creature pictured upon her clothes. But Osha had insisted that they needed more than just a hostage for Mance. They needed information, and most of all, the gods' blessings. The crows had perched at the top of the hut and cawed out into the night, giving their divine warning that yet another of their mayhaps they might be so blessed that it might be their brother in black, so that she wouldn't have to keep him from harming the girl yet another night. The girl whose hands had been tied together with some old rope they'd found in the barn, as the crow called it, in all the travel had chosen to remain tight-lipped, refusing even harmless Rickwile's attempts to bring her good cheer with a jape. As they settled in for the night, Osha thought she heard something disturb the ice-frosted grass outside the hut. But she knew better than to go out alone, and so she shook the crow awake and dragged him out with her, leaving Rickwile, who was supposed to be awake first, to be on watch, to watch the girl. Damnable Crow could keep his mouth shut as he complained about being woken up. They patrolled the outside of the hut and found nothing. That is until she heard Rickwile scream. Immediately she abandoned the crow and ran as fast as she could to return back into the hut. There she saw her little brother being mauled by a silver-covered direwolf pup the size of a dog, its teeth bearing into his throat. The girl was nowhere to be seen, probably making a run for it once the wolf had pounced. The utter agony of her brother's screams made her forget her spear, and she charged and pushed the wolf off of Rickwile with her bare hands. The wolf was easy to shove aside as a dog, and yelped at being thrust so. Immediately she checked to see how injured her brother was. The wolf had not yet finished ripping his throat out, but had punctured quite deep. He would not live long. The beast would pay. Immediately she pulled the dagger she'd taken from the Crana girl and lunged after the wolf. The beast darted and ran out the door. She followed it, but soon felt a bloodied pronged spear in her path, nearly impaling herself on it before stopping herself. There before her stood a stringy, thin man, brown of hair and beard and green of eyes, just like the Crannog girl, likely her father, the King Crannog man. Behind him stood two boys. One was likely his son by the resemblance he held to his father, and the other had hair kissed by fire with eyes as blue as the antler and looked to be a kneeler to this king of the marshes. He looked to the wolf, and wordlessly it came to him, a skin changer, mayhaps. The boy with a head as red as fire then looked at her, and suddenly some form of recognition came over the boy's eye. "Kill her not," he urged. "She held my daughter hostage." "My little lord," replied the Cranogman with an ire softness that sent a shudder down Aisha's back. "Lord, why was the king of the marshes giving way to this boy?" She then heard her brother gurgle from behind her. "Put down the spear." She turned to see her brown of hair, beard, and eye brother had forced himself to stand, holding out his own dagger in his trembling hands. Blood flowing from the wound at his neck, he began to sway on his feet. Immediately she dropped the dagger in her hands and caught her brother as he fell, and eased him down to the earth of the floor. The Crano King remained where he was, his spear adjusted to remain a threat to her life, but she cared not. All that mattered in this moment was Rickwile. "I'm sorry," he burbled, more blood flowing from his neck. "Shh! My babe of a brother!" No words need be said. From afar she heard the Marsh King murmur, "Give them peace," and she felt grateful for that. She held her brother for his final moments in her arms, neither feeling the need to speak when all was better left unspoken. He looked to her frightened of leaving her, like the little boy who had in their youth curled next to her when the wind and the rain had threatened to blow down their hut, and she held him closer, tears falling, until eventually his eyes lost what made him him, and he was no more. Catelyn. Catelyn sat in Ned's solar, as she did every day. If Rickon were older, she'd spend time trying to teach him how to be a lord, but she knew that even though he was a 5-year-old in mind, he still very much had all the tendencies and, most importantly, the attention span of the 3-year-old that he was. "We thank you for your loyalty to the realm in recognizing the king's disease and securing the safety of his children. Though we wish you had left us some warning before your unexpected departure, for it has cost our family dearly. In the king's Targaryen-inherited mad rage, he did kill our eldest son, our beloved Joffrey, and was of course egged on by those most treacherous of brothers of his. Your words at the trials of his treacherous brothers would prove weighty, and though we are loath to urge you to travel again while you are in mourning, we would request that you come as quickly as it takes to deliver your late wife's bones to the Vale and then set out for the capital with the prince and princess. Naturally, your having secured the safety of Prince Tommen and Princess Marcella from the king's wrath is to be congratulated and rewarded, and shall be when you return with the prince and princess, for though we are a Baratheon by marriage, we forget not our Lannister roots and shall pay our debts to you in full." As the babe in her stomach grew, "Oh, such a time to have a child!" News from King's Landing finally arrived, but it gave Catelyn little if any comfort. The letter was from the Queen and addressed to her good brother, Lord Arryn. Catelyn felt wrong reading his letters, feeling like she was opening one of her father's, but she was so desperate of news of Ned that she could not stand to not read it. "My Lord Arryn," the king had gone mad. Had Ned told him the truth? The crowned prince had been killed. Sansa would rejoice at this news, but there was yet nothing of Ned in this letter. From the arrival of this letter, Catelyn could see that the Lannister woman assumed that Ned and Jon would have returned safely to Winterfell by this point. So there was no purpose in applying to King's Landing for more information as to their whereabouts. Apparently with their own inquiries being made to Winterfell. But why would Ned and Jon fly with hostages? Cersei Daria. But this was yet not the only letter she had received this day. She adjusted herself in her husband's chair in the solar as she pulled out 3 letters, one addressed to her and the other 2 to Ned. The one addressed to her was from Robb, his messy scrawl giving him away. The first of the other 2 she could tell was from her nephew, recognizing his neat handwriting. But why would he be writing to Ned? Had they separated, she would leave that to last. The other address to her husband, surprisingly enough, came from Eastwatch by the Sea, as she recognized the black seal and supposed the letter E to mean Eastwatch. Though she knew that the letter from the Night's Watch was most likely the most important of the three, Catelyn delved into Robb's letter. "Mother, if you have heard news, pray tell me if father has sent word of his return. Barrington has been relieved. Lady Dustin is dead, and there appears to be no Dustin left. I would appreciate your advice on how to proceed, as there seems to be many minor lords whom would claim a chance at having the lordship through some distant relation to the Dustins. I have listed the 5 major claimants on the second sheet, and noted their connections to the Dustin family. These are the closest claimants of Dustin blood within them that have come forth to me." On the second sheet of paper she overlooked the names and frowned. Had the Dustins dwindled as a family this much? "Robb, your dutiful son, Lord Harryan, descended 11 generations from Roderick Dustin's second son's daughter. Lord Stout descended 11 generations from Fywin Dustin's second daughter. Lord Barras descended 12 generations from Roderick Dustin's eldest daughter. Lady Grey descended 13 generations from Willem Dustin's fourth daughter's daughter. Would that she could come herself, but that would mean leaving Rickon, leaving Winterfell rudderless, and abandoning her nephew, Robert, whom had only just begun to recover from the death of his mother. He was still quiet, and sometimes clung to either Sansa or herself. But both Rickon and her brother had proven to work upon the lad to come out of his silent shell. Edmure took care to teach his nephew the basics of archery, stating that though he was too young to learn on a true bow, it could not hurt to begin on a piece of string tied to either end of a stick along with blunted arrows to get him used to the motions of archery, as he had at the boy's age. No, she would have to content herself to assisting from afar. Besides, if she left, that damnable black and white wolf pup was apt to follow her, as the mother had long since abandoned her pups and returned to the wood. Lord Greengrass descended 14 generations from Tybalt Dustin's third son's daughter. It was then that Sansa entered the light-filled solar. I thought you were with your intended. The Serwyn boy was not betrothed at all to Sansa, though seemed to expect from the invitation that he was permitted to woo her. As such, he had taken some casual liberties to speaking for her mind at moments, assuming a rather casual demeanor with her daughter, and continuing his streak of childish pranks upon her siblings. The effect was as Catelyn had expected. Sansa was coming to realize more and more the true self-absorbed nature of the boy she had thought she'd known, but that Catelyn had seen at a glance. And though Catelyn could tell that Sansa had sought refuge with her in Ned's solar to escape Clee Serwyn, he was not the first concern with which she addressed her. Catelyn answered honestly, "None so far. Though I have a letter from your half-brother." "Is there any news of father?" she asked quite anxiously, her eyebrows dipping on the far ends. Sansa rebuffed. "How hard is it to say his name, mother?" Sansa seemed to accept this and reproached the subject. "Did you read his letter?" Catelyn was silent for a moment before looking Sansa in the eye to say, "I can accept much, and with time think better of him. How are to expect myself to put aside feelings garnered o'er the past 15 years or night? I cannot." Catelyn sighed before saying, "No, it's addressed to your father." Sansa's eyes grew wide at this. "But Jon was with father. Please let him have been warded elsewhere, unless they were separated." Sansa snatched her nephew's letter from her and opened it. Sansa summarized as she read, "Jon is with Sir Davos Seaworth by Stannis Baratheon's command. He reports that the Queen has captured the Baratheon brothers and taken them hostage in the Red Keep along with the king. Then he speaks of how he was almost taken hostage, but escaped. He cannot say where he is at the present, but he will continue to write as oft as he is able. By the 7, I would not have cared for that. Let him be away, but safe and not a prisoner. What happened in King's Landing? These pieces are vexing to put together." Catelyn offered the last letter she had received. Mayhaps this letter will hold some sort of answer, though she doubted it, as it was addressed to her husband. "To Lord Eddard Stark, if he live, while engaging in a practice naval exercise between the coast and Skagos, we came across some wreckage of a ship with 3 survivors, Lord Arryn, the Princess Marcella, and a blacksmith's apprentice, all nearly frozen to death in the Bay of Seals. Lord Arryn mentioned that in a previous storm, further south, you and your Braavosi man had been thrown overboard by a wave, he guessed, somewhere along the northern coast. He had hopes you had washed ashore and had returned to Winterfell by this point. If this be not the case, then I apologize to House Stark for giving false hope." Lord Aaron asks me to write to say that by the time you or your son receive this letter, he and his companions shall begin their journey to Castle Black, from which they mean to take the King's Road south to Winterfell and be there within a month. Cotter Pike, Eastwatch commander, Maud had been tossed overboard the ship before it had sunk in the Bay of Seals. He could have washed ashore anywhere from White Harbor to Carhold. He had to have lived. He simply had to leave me, not Ned, not with this little one on the way, not now. Sansa. Give me Maester Luwin immediately. Rob, he was getting sick and tired of hearing suits from all the claimants to House Dustin. The Maester told him he needed rest, but he also knew the small folk needed a lord to defend them and keep the peace. At the moment, Brandon Tallhart had stepped up as a temporary lord to help with the smaller matters of Barrington, so that Rob could have some rest, though the larger ones, such as finding the Dustin family heir so that there would once again be a lord or lady of the Barrowlands, fell to him. Even the Riswells of the Rills were staking a claim to add it to their already extensive holdings upon the fact that Lady Barbary had been a Riswell by birth and ruled the Barrowlands in her own right for nigh 5 and 10, almost 6 and 10 years. That would certainly be an easy way to settle the claim, but mayhaps it might be too much land for them to protect with reavers pestering the shores. Lady Dustin should have chosen an heir of Dustin descent. Mayhaps she did, but who? Any will she would have made was gone with the destruction of Barrow Hall. Lord Harewood Stout, a grizzled man dark blonde of hair, brown of eyes, and missing an arm, was once again boring him with the details of his family tree and impressing that he had the most recent blood of all the Dustin family claimants. He was accompanied by his 3 identical sons of the same age, Tybalt, Willem, and Rickard. They were a year younger than himself, and they seemed hard-pressed to be in the same tent with one another and not argue or throw a punch. "Boys, behave," roared Lord Harwood. "But we'll begin it," pouted Rickard, the youngest. "Ah, children," said Lord Stout to Rob, as if he would understand. "Then be a man and let it drop," urged their father. Rickard fumed, but said nothing. "I have heard your suit, Lord Stout, and am considering the request as I hear others, but I have the best blood claim," insisted Lord Harwood. Rob was tired of hearing that from every far-related Dustin relative to come through his tent. And how can you be sure of that, Lord Stout? Because from Fodman Dustin down to the late Lord William, the Dustins have had nothing but a string of only sons who survived to adulthood. One way or another, their wives and other children seemed cursed to die tragic, horrible deaths. That is, of course, until the Lady Barbary survived Lord Dustin's tragic, horrible death. But in the end, I guess the curse got her. "Liar!" shouted Rickard, who seemed intent on causing his father trouble. "I'll thrash your hide raw if you dare accuse me of that," snapped Lord Harwood. Rob had had enough. Ignoring the pain of his wrapped elbow, he stood and curtly dismissed the 4 stouts from his sight, saying he would give the matter some thought. Outside he heard reveling, as his men celebrated their own accomplishments. Rob did not feel like celebrating, not after nearly dying in a trap laid especially for him. So it was then that Rob was left to enjoy the silence of his tent in peace. Had Barrow Hall still stood, he might have taken up residence there, but since it did not, he stayed in his tent. He hobbled back over to his cot, using the Y-branch stick that had been fetched for him to help return to his cot. It upset the mainster to have him rise out of bed so oft, but Rob did not like to sit abed when he was needed. But now, in these quiet moments, only faintly disturbed by the sound of merriment, did he stretch himself out further on his cot, wincing in pain at moving his leg, and close his eyes. He did not fall asleep, but he thought he imagined himself in Winterfell playing with the wolves, though the position seemed all wrong, and he was play-biting the dirt-covered fur and the stench of the unbaited black pack-brother he played with. He could taste in his mouth. He was rough-housing as though he himself were a wolf. It must be a daydream, unless... And Rob was brought back to himself for a moment, wondering why Bran could have chosen to left now of all times when he needed him to explain what being a warg meant. Was he one too, or was he only wishing he were? It was in this state of alertness that he saw a girl. He first mistook at first for Arya. Only slightly older, mayhaps a year younger than him, or 2 appeared. He noticed through his half-closed eyes that her cloak, which was shabby and worn thin like her dress, had a stark gray direwolf running atop a brown lower field with a green barrow directly behind it and a white sky above. The lady cleared her throat, and Rob play-acted rousing from a nap. Continuing to play the part of the Rowsley sleeper, he said, "Return so soon, Lord Stout. I thought I told, and whom is this? I find in my tent." She replied bluntly, but with no hint of apology. "A humble Barrow Stark, my lord." "Lyanna Barrow Stark. I come to suit for mine and my brother's rights and inheritance." Barrow Stark? That name rung a bell in Rob's head, and suddenly he remembered that the Barrow Starks had been the original lords of the Barrowlands and built Barrow Hall like the Grey Starks had originally been lords of what became White Harbor. And, like the Grey Starks, the Barrow Starks had risen in rebellion with the Boltons against the ruling Stark king of the time. But Robb had thought the family eliminated like the Grey Starks had been, as their lands and titles had been given to the Dustins. If Robb recalled his northern history correctly, the Dustins had originally been stewards to the Barrow Starks, but had switched sides during the rebellion and been instrumental in bringing about the downfall of the Barrow Starks. "House Barrow Stark?" questioned Robb. "Aye, my lord," and Lyanna curtsied as she replied, pulling her brown and green dress up as she did. Robb couldn't help but notice some sections were stitched to hide a hole of small proportion, and the thought led him to think of how many dresses Sansa used to toss for ripping or touring, let alone getting dirty. Suddenly, he felt like he knew an extravagance that this girl had ne'er seen in her life. "What is this issue of inheritance that you come to speak with me about?" asked Robb, sitting up. She got right to the point. "Two issues, my lord. The one I come most eagerly to is that my father's small holdfast, which was ta'en by those vile Ironborn, should not upon the departure of you be claimed by some knight which would seek to call it his own." "Which holdfast, my lady?" asked Robb. She replied swiftly, "I am no lady, your lordship. It be not but a barrow knight's keep by the town's south gates. It doubles as a watchtower for the town. Mine great-grandfather did build it with his own hands and dubbed it without any imagination, Southgate. He meant for it to be a home for our family to have something to call our own. It has not been much, and it is quite costly to maintain and still eat, but it is ours. I would hate to see it depart our family on account that we had the misfortune to not apply for it." "Forgive me, cousin." "Aye, but such a distant relation it is hardly worth noting," replied Lyanna. Robb continued further, measuredly saying, "Remind me, if you will, of the past fortunes of the Barrow Starks, for I seem to forget the connection to mine own family at present. Then, in exchange, I will see your brother's suit fulfilled." She blithely explained, "It comes from the time when Starks were kings, my lord. King Doran's second son, Artos Stark, was given the lands, including the Barrows, and told to build a fort to defend the surrounding farmlands of the Barrows against the Marsh King. Thus Barrow Hall came to be built." "And was it not in rebellion that your family did meet its ruin?" asked Robb. "Aye, it did. Will you grant the suit for my brothers?" asked Lyanna. Robb paused before answering, using the opportunity to reserve a good look at his distant cousin, as he then spoke. The two words which would transform her anxiety into joy. "I will," and he was glad at having secured a view of such a transformation in his distant cousin. Her smile seemed to bring with it great merriment of its own. "And to your second request?" asked Robb. Lyanna's joy was placed back beneath a solemn face that resembled ever so slightly similar looks made by Jon and his father. "I know that I have no proper claim, but did I hear rightly you were asking for all those whom had Dustin blood in them?" Robb sighed and tried to guess how many generations it took the Barrow Starks to become so desperate as a family to marry into the family which had once been their stewards. He guessed 15 generations back. That seemed to be an appropriate amount of time for there to have been extra Dustins aplenty to marry. He sighed. By now it had almost become routine to ask, "From which Dustin do you lay claim to the lordship of the Barrowlands?" She replied simply, "From my mother, Alice Dustin, sister to the late Lord William Dustin." Robb was stunned. Where has she been the past few days? Why had he been bothered to deal with such distant Dustin relations when a strong, viable candidate such as herself remained? There had to be something more to her story. Robb then recalled that she did press this claim for herself and not in the name of her younger brothers. "Why do you so claim this right before your brothers? The North may be different from the rest of Westeros, but we are not Dorne." She replied with a tinge of bitterness to her voice, "Because, my lord, my younger brothers are but my half-brothers. Oh, I love them very dearly, but they share not the same mother as myself, and my elder brother Roderick did. My mother died as she gave me life. My lady mother did marry my poor dreamer of a father for love. You see, her father disowned her for it, and on top of which there is the ancient vow the Starks have against Barrow Starks, which is why I know my claim to be the least of your concern, your lordship. But if it were at all possible to consider it in a little bit, it would make living at Southgate all the more bearable." "The ancient vow?" asked Robb. This was something he did not recall, Maester Luwin mentioning in his History of the North. She elucidated immediately that no Barrow Stark should e'er again hold title or land. The old Stark kings proclaimed that it was to be the lot of my family, for perpetuity, for our disloyalty. We were left with naught but our name, and that is the only thing beyond our words which has seen my family through. Robb thought the idea of holding to the words of a long-dead Stark king on this matter absurd, especially when her promotion would solve this issue definitively once and for all, and would keep the title and lands off the grummy hand of a shady man such as Lord Stout. But he wondered at the mention of her elder brother. "Where is your older brother?" Lyanna seemed to soften at the mention of him, and Robb thought she almost would begin to cry and immediately regretted the question. But before he had a chance to take back what had already been said, she replied, "Roderick was in service to the late Lady Dustin. He was squiring with a Barrow Knight in Barrow Hall, hoping to earn Lady Dustin's approval. So she might ask your father to overlook his family name, so he could be named her heir, and I am afraid he ne'er returned to Southgate after the Ironborn came." Robb recalled briefly moving through the barracks of Barrow Hall, where all the squires slept, and supposed one of their maggot-infested bodies to have been yet another distant cousin, and felt a bit of rage inflame him. "And your father and stepmother?" "Dead, your lordship." It was just then that Brandon Tallhart, who was recovering faster than himself, which caused Robb to feel a little envious of, begged leave to enter to deliver a letter which had just arrived from Winterfell. Skipping o'er most of his mother's long letter, which he would read in private later, he scanned until he found the section in which his mother gave him advice that it mattered not how well related the new lord or lady of the Barrowlands be to the Dustin family, simply that they would have enough men to hold and defend the countryside. If it was simply a matter of men, well, that was already to be provided for by Brandon, as he was to keep his Tallhart forces here in the town until a force could be raised by the future lord or lady of the Barrowlands, and he was already seeing to the smaller issues that the lord or lady of the Barrowlands would have done. The only issue that kept him from being Lord of the Barrowlands himself was that he had no claim of Dustin blood. Lyanna Barrow Stark clearly had the best claim to the title, even if she did not think it likely she would be considered. She was not powerful enough on her own to hold the lordship, as she had no men sworn to her as of yet. But together they might. Their house colors are not so dissimilar either. It is like they are already married. He then noticed that both Lyanna and Brandon were seemingly attempting to make their excuses so as to leave him privacy to read his letter. But with a call of both their names, he did put a stop to their flight. "Do stay, cousin and Brandon. I would wish to speak with you both concerning your plans for the future." Brandon, he had received the king's letter requesting him to come to the capital to take up the position of Hand of the King with surprise. He knew it would bring an honor to him and his family, as well as give himself an opportunity to show his obstinate brother just what his choices in life had reaped him. Not every man need marry to bring honor and respect to one's family. Upon arrival in King's Landing, Brynden Tully had immediately gone to the Red Keep before gathering any further information. It was a decision he now regretted, kneeling before the Iron Throne of Westeros, where the self-proclaimed Queen Regent, dressed all in black, now sat in lieu of her absent son, Prince Tommen. Prince Joffrey having since been an unfortunate victim of his father's madness and warhammer, a whole host of Lannister guards and gold cloaks surrounded the throne room in an unsettling manner, ready to move at the merest flicker of the Queen's hand. No one was allowed into the throne room beyond one person at a time, with the doors shut tightly after they were permitted entry, and upon sight of the Queen, he could hardly blame her for these added securities. His arrival in the Crownlands had greeted him with wild, small-folk rumors that King's Targaryen ancestry had finally shown its face in his own form of madness. Rumors he discounted as idle gossip, equal to the one he had heard of himself once, where he supposedly had a lover in the Vale for whom he would not marry due to her being so low-born. The small folk did love to weave a good tale about high lords, of that he was certain, so he had discounted the rumors about the king upon hearing them. However, the evidence of the truth behind the tale was plain to see for Brendan's eyes, as the Queen Cersei's scared and swollen face convinced him of the king's madness far more than all the idle gossip ever had. Her face was nearly beyond recognition, completely with half her face a putrid blackish purple color, with some wounds oozing a bit of pus from half-healed scars. Brynden felt much pity for the woman. The queen spoke slowly, as though speaking were somewhat painful to do, but she spoke with the pride of her natal house. Sir Brynden, we are sad to report that your services will no longer be required. The prince's small council has selected our father, Lord Lannister, to serve the prince. Your willingness to faithfully serve the prince has been noted, and we hope that the rest of your family proves as loyal, honorable, and dutiful as yourself. Brynden bristled at the backhanded slight to his family, but he held his tongue. With so many soldiers present, now was not the moment to defend his family. In all accounts, Brynden considered himself lucky. After all, the likelihood was that he had been offered the position by the king in a fit of madness. Why else would he dismiss Jon Arryn, not to mention legitimize that bastard boy of his good nephew? He simply hoped that word of his reasons for coming to King's Landing could be kept a secret. Lest Hoster hear of it and never let him live it down. He responded politely, wishing to be done with the matter and on his way. I understand your grace, and wish your lord father the best with the position. The queen was dismissive of his well wishes, saying, he has served faithfully his hand before. He shall no doubt do so again. Brynden let the comment that was on his tongue, that he had served one madman well enough, now he might see fit to serve another, stay in his thoughts rather than slip out. He felt he was just about to be dismissed when he heard the throne room's doors burst open, and an announcer proclaim Lord Tyrion Lannister, recently come from Casterly Rock, to be present. The dwarf entered the throne room proudly, waddling as though he were the first of men. However, his procession came to a halt when his eyes fell upon his sister, whom with the opening of the doors attempted to hide her face from view from the public that waited beyond. Half of Brynden wished to be as far away as possible from the queen and her guards, but at the same time he felt drawn the promise of witnessing the confrontation between the two siblings whom the whole of Westeros knew held little love for each other. Hell, he hadn't been dismissed yet. He could linger a little longer, and besides, the doors had shut behind the imp, and guards returned to standing in front of them. 7 hells, proclaimed the imp. What are you doing here? Spat the queen. Our father sent me to be hand in his stead, since he is busy dealing with the fallout from Lannisport, said the imp rather casually. The queen exclaimed, toy words with me, snot. What do you mean? Haven't you heard? My dear pretty sister, it appears that blood vengeance reaps little reward for Reavers. They've all but withdrawn their attack of the north, and have instead begun to focus on the western coast from Seagard to Crakehall. And you know how well our father trusts our uncle, the Admiral, ever since the last Greyjoy rebellion. What of Lannisport? Asked the queen. At this the imp grew silent before speaking. They sent 3 fire ships into the harbor to destroy our fleet. Well, they burned most of it, and taking half the city with them. What news have you of the royal fleet? Red wine alone can't face this fleet. It would lead to a stalemate at best. The queen was silent, obviously in shock. Brynden knew that it was likely Seagard was blockaded but not taken due to the forces the king had commanded to meet there after news of the Greyjoy boy's death had reached him. That meant that Walder Frey was likely making a pretty penny off of being the only easy supply line to those forces. The others take the man. He offered, Your Grace, with your dismissal, I would like to attend to the force at Seagard to see if whatever fleet Lord Mallister has can be used to provide a distraction before Lord Stannis can arrive with the royal fleet. The queen looked surprised before saying, Haven't you heard, Sir Tully? Lord Stannis is a murderous traitor, who along with Lord Renly did egg on the king to slay his son and heir and give these small wounds we have endured. That did not sound right. Lord Stannis was an honorable man. He did not know Lord Renly that well, but of Stannis he knew the man's character to be near impeccable. There was something that the Lion Queen wasn't saying. What did Jaime do? Asked the imp. Not now, little brother. A term otherwise of endearment came out like a vicious slander from the queen's lips. Just then a messenger from one of the city's watchtowers arrived and made his way before the throne to announce, Your Grace, it is my duty to report that a large army has been spotted approaching the city. An army? Exclaimed the queen. Aye, from the King's Wood, replied the messenger. That is likely the Stormlords come to witness the trials of the Lords Baratheon, scoffed the imp. Brynden knew that he had likely lingered too long, and so quietly began to back away towards the doors. But just as he was about to do so, several guards surrounded him, their weapons drawn. Monsieur Tully, we did not dismiss you yet. We have yet need of you and your family's loyalty, wolf. She had been running for many suns and moons. Her paws ached, but she needed to press on. Over hills full of white woolly prey did she pass. They bleated as he did pass. Part of him wished to be diverted with the thrill of the chase and kill of these creatures. It wouldn't take too long, but no, she must press on. The Alpha of the Man Pack needed her. Sometimes he was with her in a way she had never known possible, but then he wasn't. It was from the last time they had shared thoughts together that she did know he was in need of her. And so she left her little pack with the Alpha Man's pack. They would look after each other, for they were but one and the same in a way that she was coming to see herself and the Alpha Man. He at first did not like thinking the same thoughts, but the more it did happen, the more he seemed to embrace it, as did she. Soon it felt natural, as though it had always been this way between them and always would. After a few suns had passed, she did come to some chase of her own, as angry men farmers, the shepherds, the Alpha Man had thought to her. With long claws, pitchforks, they could throw chased her away. She did avoid the white woolly prey from then on, which only added to the journey. More suns came and went, until at long last he saw the endless salty water before him. Wet and clunky earth that was fine and gritty did irritate her paws and cling to the sand was what the Alpha Man had thought it. The word meant much and little to her. All at once she was close to the Alpha Man. She knew it. He was with another man, a lone wolf, and they were near the sand and the endless salty water. They had been here a while traveling along the sand to find where they were, but she would find them. Each night she did feel the Alpha and her join as one more and more the closer they got. He had slowed his and the man's progress so that she might join them. And when they joined, she knew by which rocks that he had passed or slept by. That is, until this night when he did not come. She knew he was not far, but yet he did not come. This worried her, and so she sped up her pace. She knew she had come to the place that he and the other man had stopped when she saw the small fire he had built. She could smell him and the other man unlike she had ne'er before, but both men were not there. She continued to sniff to try and find where he had gone and why he left the fire unattended. And then she heard men at a distance. Her eyes trained on where she heard the clamor, and she saw a small group of men meeting with the Alpha Man. At first she thought that they had taken him, and so she did pursue. But as she did approach, she saw that amongst this men was a she-man, who greeted the Alpha Man as a man pack member should. She then stopped and watched as the she-man rose from kneeling before the Alpha Man. It was then one of the she-man's pack did point to her, and all eyes fell upon her. At once she thought she might have to face the men and their long claws. That was until the Alpha Man did put a stop to them, and then joined her for a moment, and told her to come. She approached slowly, not trusting the she-man and her smaller pack that was part of the Alpha Man's pack. But she did come. The she-man did ask, "Lord Stark, is that?" The Alpha Man did come and stand next to her, which was only natural, as he said. "I, Lady Lyessa, this is my wolf, Cersei." She was going to kill Tyrion for this. She should not be seen like this. People stared at her with pity. She didn't need anyone's pity. She was a lioness. Proud, triumphant. She should be. But with Yaime's breath so shallow and wheezy, her roar had left her. He had said, "Had you been born with a cock between your legs, you could have lived, sweet sister." How she wished she'd been born a man. She would have gelded the imp long ago and drowned him in a barrel of wine. And he had continued, "But luckily for us, you're a wronged woman, battered wife, and grieving mother. Use those things to our advantage." And so she was walking out to meet the Stormlords, led by elderly Lord Eldon Estermont. She walked barefoot from the gates of the city, dressed in her widow's weeds, without any makeup, at the head of a cart in which lay the coffin of her dear beloved Joffrey, which Tyrion had ensured was dressed in Baratheon black and gold. "You're the one who chose this role. You, dear sister, not me. I am merely helping you to bring it to its complete realization," he had said. The procession was not heavily guarded, for she was a queen coming to meet with her people who had come to her aid. And when she approached, she saw the affect of her appearance on the few Stormlords that had gathered at the sight of her. Lord Yastermont especially seemed to be unable to take his eyes off her bruised and swollen face, made all the more offensive since Tyrion had insisted she not seek further treatment for the 2 days it had taken for the army to settle outside their gates. After walking the muddy mile to the encampment, she then climbed to the cart to speak. Calling their attention, she did begin, "Bannermen, lords, brothers by marriage, if not blood, I come to you today, not only as a queen and wife to our most beloved monarch, but also as a mother and woman most grievously wronged. She then pulled open the coffin and was shocked at how Tyrion had arranged her son, her beloved son, clad in Baratheon black and gold. He was, but his wounded chest was left open and bare for all to see the bloodied mess that had been her son in his final moments. The blood was now dried and his skin pale, making his hair appear darker. She gasped at the sight of him again, her memory of him protecting her from Robert's wrath in the end having cost them both so much. With tears in her eyes and emotion in her voice, she continued, "You see before you the body of our most beloved prince, a young and worthy fawn who had just begun to groan his antlers and show his Baratheon fury. He was the White Hart, come to lead the house of Baratheon to glory and renown through his reign. Or is Baratheon come again? Now he is unjustly cut down before his time." She then knelt down and cradled the body of her son, pulling him out of the coffin for the whole army to see. She heard a few gasps. She called out, "He was an innocent whose spilled blood cries out for vengeance to those who've struck him down. Hear you not its cry? Would that I were a man to answer it. But being a woman, I have only the right to grieve and bear the injustices done to House Baratheon. My adopted house, I may have been born a proud lioness. In this moment, I know I have the heart and stomach of a furious stag, as you do, my brothers." At this, a few quiet eyes rose out amongst the lower ranks, old men and green boys. She would need to draw upon more than this to prove her cause. She continued, "So it is to you, my great loyal brothers, I do beg as a mother for justice. Justice for our young stag." The old heir of Greenstone did reply at this, "And justice you shall receive, my lady, for the true murderers of our fair prince, which truly aren't honorable men like Lords Renly and Stannis. I most graciously thank you, my lord, but do you not know that you do further wrong to our prince by this call? You say that Lords Renly and Stannis are honorable men, and from knowing them both, I do agree that they are both honorable men. And yet here our tragic prince lay dead at their honorable words. Do you not recognize his wounds? What else can they be from but a warhammer? And whom else could swing such a weapon but his father? Aye, but what would drive to make the father murder his own beloved fawn? Why honorable words from honorable men? This be but the honorable end to honorable words. I demand justice, my lords, for his most honorable death, or else you do but kill our young stag again. I beseech you to avenge this killing." "Not all, 7 hells, not even half," the assembled lords and men cried out after her call, but then she needed Sansa. Upon finally hearing from her mother word of the death of Joffrey, Sansa felt as though a tremendous weight had been lifted off her. There was no danger now of any betrothal to that monster ever. She was free, free. And after the joy and many delights this realization had brought her had passed, she then turned her thoughts to contemplating exactly how he had died, at his supposed father's hand. Such a charge as kinslayer now rested on the king, saved only with the claim that he as well had gone as mad as the last king. Things were wildly diverging from what had been, and that both thrilled her and scared her. What if this new future was worse than the old one? Thus far it seemed rather safe for her and her family, but every little choice she now saw had its consequences. When word arrived of Robb's sudden rediscovery of the Barrow Starks, and his choice in suggesting Lyanna Barrow Stark as heir to Barbary Dustin, Sansa felt her brother might be making a mistake. She knew the history of the Barrow Starks well enough, far better she imagined than Robb did, obviously. The Barrow Starks, along with the Grey Starks, had supported the Boltons in their grab for power, becoming kinslayers in the process as they had murdered their Starkin. Sansa wondered if this might be a move to begin the process of regaining what they had lost by outwitting her simple, naive, trusting brother. So she set her mind upon that news of writing to her brother on the subject, asking him to instead find a better person for the lordship of the Barrowlands. Someone with better relations with their family history. However, when her mother read further on that to help secure the lands this Lyanna Barrow Stark was to become betrothed to Brandon Tallheart, Sansa knew she had to go to Barrowton immediately. If for no other reason than to delay this betrothal until father might be found, she did not wish to see history repeated herself, with the Barrow Starks rising once again under the name of a Tallheart branch to stab the Stark family in the back like they had good King Domeric. That's at least the reason she told herself why she was going to Barrowton. Along the journey she was accompanied by Clay for protection, Reports stated that all of the Ironborn had long since retreated to the Salt Spear and Blazewater Bay, with further rumors that more and more ships were on the move. The town was obviously damaged, but held a sort of quaint market town, nature quality to it. The houses were square and sturdy little things of wood and stone, seeming to pop out of the ground like a field of mushrooms. The most spectacular building before her was the town hall, a three-towered structure, which loomed over the central square, which doubled as a marketplace. The tallest tower, containing a clock, which chimed as they crossed the square. Her brother's encampment was outside the fortified town, so they continued their journey. Along the way, she thought she saw Clee engage in a brief conversation with a pretty young girl, but she paid no mind to it. Nor did she seem particularly upset when her protection drifted off in the direction of a nearby tavern. They had been at each other's throats the entire trip, her upset about a particularly nasty prank back at Winterfell of drenching poor young Robert in red syrup while he slept, so that when he awoke, he found himself stuck to his bed. The experience had so troubled her poor young cousin that he had gone completely into a shaking fit. Lucy had thought they were all overreacting and that the boy couldn't handle a good joke, so Sansa did not mind his drifting off in Barrington in the least. Upon arrival in the battered town, she found not only that Brandon and Lyanna were to be officially proclaimed as betrothed before the town hall in a few days' time. She also heard rumor that her brother was near ready to depart the town for some military tactic he had concocted. Apparently, the Ironborn had retreated from their offensive to raiding the coast along Blazewater Bay and the Salt Spear, and he wanted to draw them into a trap of his own. He was to set along the Blazewater River. Sansa, knowing of his victories and military stratagems from the frequent beatings she had received in the other future, decided that in this matter, Robb knew best. She would, however, challenge Robb's choice on awarding the lordship of the Barrowlands as he did, which she intended to do privately in his own tent. As she approached the tent after Clay abandoned her to frequent the nearest tavern, a guard was sent in to notify her brother as to her arrival. As the guard came back out, she heard Robb say from inside the tent, "Lord Racewell, I would love to continue speaking on this issue with you, but I am afraid I must greet my sister who has only just arrived. Would you care to join me in doing so?" Out came her brother, dressed in his stark colors, with added bandages and wraps around his wounds. Lord Raziel, meanwhile, was a tall and lean man, with long brown hair, heavily streaked with gray tied back as a horse's tail would look. Despite his age, appeared to be quite fit. "Sansa, what are you doing here?" Robb greeted her in a near rhetorical manner that struck her as false. Sansa gave her best performance of a happy girl, not for her brother's benefit, but for Lord Raziel. "Dear Robb, I have come to meet this new cousin you've discovered." Sansa knew, by the way he spoke, what came next. He was rather pointedly attempting to get rid of Lord Raziel. "Of course you have. Come in. Surely you must have news of Winterfell." After he had settled her into the tent, he finally confided his real thoughts to her. "I have to leave this town. The Ironborn are still raiding around Blazewater and the Salt Spear, and here I am stuck here, arguing about inheritance." All this while he had not sat down, and Sansa saw that the wrapped ankle seemed to pain him so as he leaned more heavily on his cane to compensate. So she told him, "You have to heal. If you rest not, that ankle will never heal right, and then you truly would never be able to lead men in battle the same again." After she forced him to sit down with his leg propped up, he then asked, "Any word on father?" She readily replied, "Not when I left. Gods, I'd hoped that when you came that you'd have found him and brought him." "Lord Yatsley is no horse. He's as stubborn as a mule," scoffed Robb. "This is as much about being a Lord, Robb, as leading men in battle. You have to know how to deal with your sworn lords. What be his claim?" Robb rubbed his hands on his face, clearly trying to wipe away the memory of the discussion he had had with the stern-looking lord. She had seen earlier that father left his daughter Barbary rule the Barrowlands in her own name, effectively beginning a new descent of lordship, meaning that it would pass to her heirs, not a distant Dustin relation. And he's his daughter's heir. She knew immediately what the issue was. Lord Radziel wants Barrowton. It's the most populated town in our western holdings, and the one that sees the most trade with Seaguard, Lannisport, and the Reach. He'd be a fool not to try to claim it anyway. He can. I have been having some men check the town hall's ledgers. Hopefully something will come of them that'll put this matter to rest. I imagine most of those records are concerning all the food supplies they have to keep, tutted Sansa. At this Robb sighed and said, "No barrow hall was the one which served as the gathering point for the winter's supplies. And hearing that, that's when Sansa knew how exactly to approach the problem. If he wanted Lord Rexwell off his back, but Sansa was unsure if she wanted to mention it. If that would only give him an excuse to continue with the Barrow Starks inheriting. Just then Brandon Tallheart entered the tent. He was stopped for a moment to see Sansa there, but then gained control once again of himself and turned to Robb. Brandon gave a fleeting look to Sansa as he acknowledged her presence, before overlooking her for the rest of his announcement. "My lord, my lady, I've brought the town clerk. He would like to speak with you based upon your inquiries upon the town records." "At last, some answers," exclaimed Robb. The clerk, Norwin Fields, was a tiny man. One could almost call him a dwarf, except he was completely proportional. He had something of the field mouse about his looks and behaviors, nervously fretting over the smallest of details in everything he read. As it turned out, from the town hall's records, Lyanna Barrow Stark, it seemed, had told the truth of her descent. The town records concerning marriage showed that Alice Dustin had indeed married Ronald Barrow Stark. Subsequent ledgers concerning births recorded that Ronald and Alice had indeed given birth to Roderick and Lyanna, as well as another infant sister in between, who had apparently died young, for she showed up in no other records beyond interment in the Lichfield. A subsequent marriage to Branwen Molan had produced 2 sons named Mark and Osric, who seemed to be about Bran's age. Branwen's record stopped with a ledger recording her own interment in the Lichfields. However, the news that no copy of Lady Dustin's last will had been kept with the mouse clerk troubled Robb more than the confirmation of Lyanna's story. After Norwin had left, Sansa finally had to admit, "You know, her being who she says she is only makes matters worse." "What do you mean?" asked Robb. Sansa wondered if he could be so blind. "She's aiming for power, and this lordship is her first stepping stone." Robb scoffed before saying, "Sansa, you haven't even met her yet." "I don't have to have met her to know this." "Why not? Had he forgotten already?" Sansa took a breath before saying as she exhaled, "Because I was in her place in the other future, or don't you recall? After a while, all I could think about after we'd lost the North was how I could get it back, how I could return. Mark my words, Robb. She's thinking the exact same things." "But the Barrow Starks lost all claims to the Barrowlands thousands of years ago. I have no doubt that long ago they held such ambitions, but them building Southgate and involving themselves as sellswords or in trade does not bespeak of higher ambitions, at least not for the past few generations." Sansa could see that he was actually better informed than she thought he would have been. She'll use Brandon as a stepping stone to more power. It was then that Robb gave Sansa a look as though he finally understood something he hadn't before. Though what that was she couldn't tell, until he finally said, "I think you need to talk to Brandon." Sansa cautiously admitted, "I was going to eventually, but I—" "No! Now, my dear love-struck sister." Love-struck? Brandon? What did Robb take her for? She felt as though she had to correct him. "Robb, I came here for the benefit and security of our house, not because of Brandon." "Of course," answered Robb with an infuriating grin. She felt incensed at the fact that he didn't take her concern seriously, and so she snapped, "I am being quite serious. The last thing I want to see is you make some political blunder that gets us all killed at somebody's wedding." Robb took great offense at her suggestion. She and Arya had told them all that they had known of the Red Wedding that they could have pieced together without having been there. There was clearly no other thing that she could be referring to, and Robb knew it. Sansa wished for anything to have taken back those words right then. Even if she did think them to be true, Robb did not deserve to hear them. He asked as though attempting to hold back his building anger, "So mistakes I've made in a future that's unlikely to ever happen now, I'm supposed to be held accounted for now?" Sansa knew not what to say to this immediately. She was still rather shocked that she had even said it aloud. So he continued, seeming more enraged by her silence. "What of your own mistakes in this other time?" she began. Yet he interrupted her and pointedly added, "No, I think you would not want to speak with me. I might just say something that would get us all killed." Sansa left the tent not long after in a huff. The argument had further descended into an exchange that had resembled her fights with Arya than anything she had had with Robb. After such an exchange, her mouth quenched for the tart taste of some wine, and before she knew it, she had found herself outside one of the few taverns outside of town walls. Being a bastard in the Eyrie had afforded her only a few privileges, easier access to drink than her father had permitted under his roof, having been one of the few. She drew up her hood so as to not be known immediately, settled herself at a small table and ordered some wine, not caring that no one she knew was not with her. The serving woman gave her an odd look, but dismissed it when she found Sansa to be a more than generous patron in her payment. In what felt like several minutes later, Sansa was joined in the tavern after she had secured half a flagon for herself by a well-bandaged half a head. And that was when Sansa realized that somehow Brandon had found her. He was dressed in a simple tunic with the tall heart trees upon it, leather jerkin and boots and breeches, all of which were shades of the tall heart green and brown. Without asking for permission, he joined her with a glass of his own, and asked, "What did he say to you?" "Didn't he tell you?" asked Sansa as she drained the remainder of her glass. If he wanted to play the questions game, she could play right back along. "Truly, Sansa, what happened?" asked Brandon. He seemed genuine in his curiosity to know. "We argued, like all siblings do," she said, hoping that keeping it simple would be better for her. She called for more wine and bread at that moment. This was their first time alone in each other's presence since they'd argued in Winterfell's Godswood. Though she guessed that with increasingly finding other guests appearing at other tables, they weren't truly alone. Sansa took advantage of the silence that fell between them for the moment to truly get a look at Brandon. The upper portion of the right side of his face was still wrapped in cloths from the burns he'd sustained in retaking Barrow Hall, and Sansa for a brief moment wondered if he would grow to look more like the Hound had when she had known the man in the other time. She broke the silence which had consumed them until this moment by complimenting him on his reported battle prowess and bravery. He cut right through her words and asked, "Why did you come here?" He seemed to have become more sharp with his manner of address. "I needed a drink," was Sansa's response as the serving woman brought a loaf of bread and a new flagon of wine. Sansa paid immediately and tipped her well. She then broke off a piece of bread and handed half of the chunk she had broken off to Brandon, and together they did dip the bread in their own wine to eat. The sweet soggy bread trickling down her throat. "Alone?" asked Brandon once the woman had left. "Why not? Is not the North safe for a daughter of Winterfell?" she asked almost rhetorically. He explained further. There still lurk Ironborn about, sabotaging what they can. Not to mention others who might use a disruption to a town such as the loss of a lordship as an excuse to do, well, anything. Concern for my well-being, Brandon. Well, at least someone on this trip seems to care. She should have brought Lady, then she would have felt safer. But the last time she'd taken Lady on a trip about this age. No, best not to chance the gods a second time on that. Brandon then sighed and said, "Your brother asked me to find you. Did he?" And once again a silence fell between them. It probably was the amount of wine she had drunk by this point, but she did not care. She couldn't stop herself as the first question, the hidden question, came bursting forward. "Why do you want to be betrothed to Lyanna?" He avoided answering anything, considering she's to be the lady of the Barrowlands. I thought that would be rather obvious. "So it's entirely for her expected lands and titles?" asked Sansa. "No, not completely," was his ambiguous answer. Sansa questioned, "Then why else?" He did not say anything much further to her question, instead at long last taking a second sip of wine. So she asked another question. "Do you think she'll make you happy?" He gruffly replied, "I think you're overstepping your boundaries, Lady Sansa." Sansa insisted, "I ask not but for your concern." "What do you care what I do with my life?" asked Brandon bitterly. Sansa couldn't help herself. Perhaps it was the wine speaking. "I would rather not see you chained in marriage to someone you didn't really want." There was a brief pause before he replied. "So now you notice." Sansa did not know what to say this response. He sighed before saying, "It's too late, Sansa. You've made your choice. Now you have to live with it." "What?" He spoke to her in less evasive words. "You and Axley are betrothed." "No, we're not," countered Sansa. "Is that so? Then why is he in town spreading the news around about how you're not only betrothed, but that you also..." His conviction seemed to fail him as he did realize what he was about to say. She should have been angry and stamping on the ground, but all she could think of for the moment to respond with was the insipid, "You were with Clackett?" He seemed to become rather incensed by the suggestion, but merely quietly said, "I was meeting with Lyanna and he started to make a fool of himself for the entire tavern to see, like usual." Sansa disliked at how casually he referred to the possible new Lady of Barrington. "Well, it isn't true, but then again, nearly nothing, he says, seems to be either," replied Sansa more than a tad bitterly. He seemed to give her a kindly look at this response, which she told herself that she did not desire, but she still felt grateful for nonetheless. However, before she could loosen her tongue on the subject, a guard dressed in the tall heart colors approached him. "My lord, Lord Stark requests your immediate presence in his tent. It concerns the Lady Barrow Stark." Brandon told him to give the message to Robb that he was on his way. And then he stood and held out his hand to help Sansa to her feet, saying, "Come, I'm not leaving you here to drink alone." After downing the last of her wine, Sansa contented herself to taking the rest of the loaf with her. She took his hand to rise and found she most surely needed it. When they had returned to Robb's tent, Sansa had found that it was far later than she suspected, as the evening hours had since fallen upon the outskirts of the town, casting everything in the eerie glow of twilight. On the periphery of her vision, she could swear she saw shadows move that shouldn't have. Robb's tent, thankfully, was better lit, though not by much. She was dizzy from the walk and was given a chair to gather herself in. "Gods! I told you to find her, not get her in her cups," scolded Robb when they had settled her. "Let it go, Robb. I'm the one who drank as much as I did." "It's not like you haven't done the same, and in the first keep, no less." Robb seemed to simultaneously blush and pale, which was quite a sight to see. It was then that a sob was heard from across the tent, and Sansa turned to see what looked like Brandon comforting a crying Arya. But Arya had not come with her, and she was far too old to be Arya. Then this must be Lyanna. Brandon asked, "What's happened?" "My brothers, they're gone," sobbed Arya's twin. "Gone?" asked Brandon. "After we spoke, I returned to Southgate to find them missing." "Mayhaps they had gone a-wandering," asked Sansa, thinking of how Rickon and Bran would disappear when it suited them. At this suggestion, Lyanna shook her head and said, "Osric might have, but not Mark. Mark does not like to be far from Southgate. I have to drag him to get him to go anywhere," and she bitterly laughed. "Mayhaps Osric did so to his younger brother," Sansa suggested, making assumptions which were quickly dismissed as it proved that Mark was the elder, not the reverse. Lyanna despairingly said, "I've checked everywhere they would have gone. The Lichfield, the town hall, the market, even the great weirwood, but they were nowhere." "Be calm, my lady. I shall find your brothers," Brandon said in a manner that made Sansa recall the childhood games of lady and knight they had played at. He was being her knight, and he would rescue her missing brothers. Lyanna smiled through her tears and wished him luck, playing the role of the lady to a degree which shocked Sansa, how much it suited her. Seeing him pledge as such, them both dressed in brown and green, Sansa did see them as though they were already married, and a chill went down her spine at the thought. It was then that Brandon departed. This left Sansa, Robb, and the still-crying Lyanna alone together. Robb, it seemed, was still slightly sour, as the tentative attempt she made at trying to mend their disagreement was put off until she'd recovered her wits, and he left the tent with the excuse of needing to speak with Clyde's father about the counter-offensive he was planning against the Ironborn, and left. "How old are your brothers?" asked Sansa, not feeling like she could find as easy an excuse to flee the tent so soon after Robb had, and also feeling it improper to do so while Lyanna was still troubled. "Mark will be 8 soon, and Osric just turned 6. They're not much older than mine, and Robb's younger brothers." Lyanna suddenly realized and reacted, "Oh, excuse me, my lady, but I can see you are Lord Robb's sister. You both have the same look about you, but I forgot." Sansa saw the girl trip over her apology to her offense to proper etiquette, and Sansa knew at an instant that Lyanna, though she might share Arya's stark features, was not alike her sister in any other manner. And as they conversed, Sansa found herself more and more coming to like Lyanna, though she still suspected that the girl was hiding some kind of secret. Conversation eased between the two of them, as Sansa attempted to distract Lyanna by getting her to speak of her brothers, and not focus on the fact that they were missing. "Mark has been very quiet lately. He used to follow our elder brother, Roderick, around everywhere, until he went to Squire at Barrow Hall, said he wanted to be just like Roderick when he was older. I think he's taken his death the hardest of us all. After we moved back into Southgate, he wouldn't stop carrying a little wooden sword that Roderick made for him everywhere. He's become such a melancholic little boy now." "And how fares Osric since your brother's passing?" asked Sansa. Lyanna smiled a bit before saying, "Osric can fare anything. The wall may fall, the others turn us all to whites, and the only time he'd notice anything had changed would be when his food was missing. The trees become too slick to climb, and the barrows too frozen to dig into." It was upon that last comment that Lyanna's eyes seemed to widen, as though having realized she'd said far too much. But before Sansa could contemplate what this meant her attention, a cloaked man with a burlap sack and a club entered the tent. Not from the entrance, but from sneaking under the sides, followed by 2 more fellow hooded compatriots. Sansa shouted for the guards to come, but only 2 did and were quickly knocked out by the clubs. Lyanna screamed as the man with the sack approached her, and Sansa dove for a dagger that her brother had haphazardly left on the table. As she did so, however, she felt something hard come down upon her head, and Sansa rapidly lost consciousness. Yaxley. When Clef awoke after having been knocked out in the confrontation, he found himself to be in a dark, rocking wooden room. The only source of light in the room coming from a square opening high above them left open, but with bars atop it to prevent them from getting any smart ideas about escaping. From the dim light this opening provided, Clef estimated it was either near dawn or dusk when he awoke. His right cheek bothered him a tremendous deal, and he put his hand to it to find that a scar likely from the swords he'd faced had left its mark. He then stirred himself to look around his prison, his sore body aching at the movement. He saw that he was far from the only prisoner. He was captive with 3 others, who looked rather exhausted, an older man with white sideburns, and what appeared to be his 2 near-grown sons. They laid at the other end of the room near one another in seeming melancholic fits. At his stirring, the younger of the 2 seared Redrick. He's awoke, and his 3 fellow prisoners at once crowded around him. "Where am I?" asked Clive. "On one of your father's ships, young Theon," said Sir Roderick. Clive at once felt confused and upset by this old man's assumption of knowing him or his family. "I have no father, and my name is Clive." Then suddenly he recalled the fight on the beach, and Nila fleeing. "Where's Nala?" he asked, looking around as though expecting her to appear. If she wasn't here, had she made it to the town in time? "Clive?" asked the eldest boy. "I have no idea who you speak of." "Forgive me, Clive. Your face reminded me of someone I once knew, but now I see it's likely impossible," said the old man in a rather defeated tone. Troubled at the thought of not knowing Niadia's fate and their lack in ability to answer his questions, he foolishly lashed out at the old man by saying, "I am sorry my face causes you grief, old man." It was with a punch to his left cheek from the youngest boy. "You'll treat Sir Roderick with some respect," growled the youngest as he shook his hand out after the punch. After recovering from the shock of the moment, Clive went to lunge after the younger boy, but the elder boy held him back as the old knight reprimanded the young boy. "Skake, remember a knight's vow." "Yes, sir," murmured Skake shamefacedly. As Clive rubbed his increasingly sore and swelling left cheek, the old knight came before him. "My apologies to the discourtesies of my squire, Clive," sighed Sir Roderick, looking rather defeated. Seeing the old man deflate from the stature he'd held a moment earlier, Clive was reminded that they were just as much victims of the likely Ironborn realizing his foolishness at turning his anger and worry on not knowing Niala's fate on the old knight. He apologized hesitatingly. "I should not have spoken as I did." The old knight looked at Clive and smiled before saying, "You are most certainly not the person I mistook you for. Mayhaps we let the misunderstandings of the past rest." "I," agreed Cliven with a shake of hands. All was forgotten. "So tell me, friends, how came you to be in this place?" asked Clive. "We were sent by Our Lady to search for her son who had gone missing, and likely been kidnapped by a Crannog man. We were searching the swamps of the Neck and got lost ourselves, and nearly died in attempting to find our way out. We were surely close to death when we at long last heard men and followed them to try and find our way out. But it turned out, to our misfortune, that the men were Ironborn, and we were captured and taken back to their ship, and then later transferred to this ship, for a reason I know not, and yourself, friend." And Claff told him his story of how he had defended Neela and their unborn child, with all the heroics he could squeeze into the telling bragging that he must have taken on at least 10 Ironborn with his fists alone, but was knocked out in the process. "The similarity at times, though, can be uncanny," murmured Sir Roderick in a voice he obviously thought was solely to himself. It was then that the sound of footsteps above approached the small opening that was their only access to the world around them. A small basket tied to a rope was sent down, providing bread and limes, which apparently was to be their sole nourishment. This state of affairs continued for several days, during which Clive came to find his companions to be better company than he had hoped for, as they talked of the lord and lady they worked for, the Starks of Winterfell. They sounded almost as an ideal family the way Sir Roderick and Emmerich spoke of them. Then, one day, the bars to the world above were lifted and a rope ladder lowered upon which 2 armed Ironborn came down and took Clive. He was then escorted to another part of the ship where he was pushed into another room, this one far cozier and better lit by actual windows. The room was obviously meant for the person in charge of the ship they were on. What surprised Cliff most of all was that such a person sitting before him at a table with a goblet of wine happened to be a woman. She was lean, long-legged, a thin face, short black hair, and a sharp nose. Upon her black leather bodice was a golden kraken. She was not dressed in dresses, but rather in black leather breeches. She seemed to look him over as though he were something she were considering purchasing before she commanded him to sit down. She then took the nearby flagon of wine and refilled her goblet. As she did thus, she said one word, "Name." "Cleef." The woman then rose and walked around the table and grabbed him by the chin, getting an even closer look, her thumb pressing hard against the lower hin of his still swollen left cheek. "Yes, I can see how a certain likeness about the chin. They weren't wrong about that. But there's no mistaking that you're a Greenlander through and through. You might have a touch of iron blood in your veins, but many coast dwellers do." She spoke to him as though he knew what she were talking about. She, like Sir Roderick, likely thought he resembled someone, and now his curiosity was getting piqued. "Who's this man I am supposed to resemble so much to everyone?" "A dead one," was the woman's only reply as she let go of his chin and returned to her seat, sipping her wine all the while. "I should toss you overboard and let the storm god or drown god fight for you. But you conveniently happen to resemble him enough that I'm moved to have some amount of mercy for you in his memory." "What do you mean?" asked Clive. She sharply retorted with, "The only thing I need to know from you is if you want to live or die. You're too low to be a hostage of any worth." Clive thought only but an instant. If there was but the smallest chance he could live and get away to find Miela, he'd do it. So he said, "Live." "That settles that," she said with a smile. And Clive was set up from that day forward to be a deckhand.
Thank you for listening to the story. If you enjoyed this reimagined story and audiobook style presentation, feel free to like and subscribe for more content like this. New stories and alternate scenarios are updated regularly. Now see you in the next video.